Very good. May I then take this opportunity to welcome all of us to this webinar. And thank you, everyone. And may I say good afternoon or good evening, depending on our time zones. My name is Francis, and we are honored with my colleague, Callum Watson, to be your host in this virtual event on the sidelines of BMS8. We are delighted to have all of you in this webinar and appreciate that you have set aside your precious time to attend. We also appreciate our panelists and look forward to their interventions because I know they are ready for us. The Small Arms Survey is hosting this side event, roundtable discussion on experiences from West Africa with a focus on Sierra Leone to facilitate the identification of points of convergence between arms control initiatives and other processes relevant to the UN framework on sustaining peace. And may I now invite my colleague, Callum Watson, to introduce and invite our first speaker for the day.
Many thanks, Francis. So hello to everybody. My name is Callum Watson, and I am the gender coordinator at the Small Arms Survey. And I'm actually speaking to you today from New York, where, as you probably know, it's the 8th biennial meeting of states for the Programme of Action on Small Arms Control. So first of all, it's my pleasure to invite Finda Senesi, the first secretary of the Sierra Leone Permanent Mission to the UN in New York. And she's going to provide some opening remarks for us and then discuss some of the gendered aspects of small arms in Sierra Leone, and how to ensure coordination between national focal points working on women, peace and security and on small arms control. So it's now my pleasure to hand the floor to Ms. Finda Senesi. The floor is yours.
Thank you so very much for giving me the floor. Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the Permanent Mission of Sierra Leone to the United Nations, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual event. But first, let me express my enduring appreciation to our panelists and all of you for taking time off your busy schedules to be with us today. Sierra Leone and the Arms Survey organized today's roundtable discussion on a collaborative approach to small arms control in West Africa. We commend Arms Survey for the tireless efforts in putting this together and for the fantastic work they have been doing and continue to do on arms control. It is now my honor to open this side event. As a committed member of the United Nations Programme of Action on Small Arms, the African Union's initiative on silencing the guns in Africa by the year 2030, and the ECOWAS Convention on Small Arms, Sierra Leone remains committed to the cause and actions dedicated to the advancement of global small arms control efforts. Like other West African countries, Sierra Leone established a vibrant National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons, and the Commission is currently revising its National Action Plan on small arms effort, and so as to combat and eradicate the illicit transfer and misuse of small arms and light weapons. The African Union's Silencing the Guns initiative was launched in 2020, which member states committed to implementing through developing national action plans adapted to promote participation and contribution of the population, in particular, women and youths. States agreed during the 7th biennial meeting of states on the Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons in 2022 to utilize analysis mechanisms to inform evidence-based, gender-sensitive policy making, and programming to strengthen the full and effective implementation of the POA at all levels. Going forward, the Sierra Leone National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons, in developing its second generation NAP, National Action Plan, factored the integration of a gender perspective by also defining critical roles women and youth should play in reducing armed violence. Other initiatives recently undertaken by the national level, have included capacity building programs under the auspices of the UN Regional Center for Peace and Disarmament in Africa, UNREC, focusing on mainstreaming youth and gender perspectives in small arms control. Details of these initiatives will be fleshed out by our distinguished representative from Capital, Colonel Retired Bine Conte. Today, we would like to take the opportunity to share some good practices and lessons learned that might be of use to others in the region and above. In recent years, Sierra Leone has made progress in ensuring linkages between its work on controlling small arms and light weapons and that of women, peace, and security agenda. Some of the lessons learned thus far are the Sierra Leone National Action Plan on Small Arms for 2011 to 2015 did not contain indicators relating to gender responsiveness or the full and meaningful participation of women and youth in the process. There was no collaboration or coordination between the National Action Plan of Small Arms and that of Women, Peace and Security, even though small arms and light weapons heavily impacted women and youth during the Sierra Leone Civil War as victims, survivors, or even combatants. It is now refreshing to note that several recent international frameworks have drawn attention to the importance of connecting work on small arms control with that of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Some examples include UN Security Council Resolution 2122 of 2013, the 7th resolution on women, peace and security, which mentioned the need to ensure women's full and meaningful participation in the work of arms control. In conclusion, given the impact of small arms on women, girls, and youth, it is also essential to ensure the meaningful participation of women's and youth groups so they can feed on their perspectives, develop and implement robust capacity building on small arms control, focusing on women and youth to enable them make meaningful and realistic contributions. C, to bridge funding gaps to enhance gender responsiveness. To that end, as I reiterate the need for broader approaches in formulating national action plans for both small arms and women's peace and security agendas, it will open collaboration at national, regional, and global levels. The focus will be to ensure communities understand them as critical contributions to peace and security and social and economic development for our countries and the region. I thank you for your attention.
Many thanks for your intervention there, Ms. Finda from the Sierra Leone mission here in New York. And it's interesting that many of the comments you made there reflect the discussions that we're currently having in the biennial meeting of states for the Programme of Action on Small Arms Control. So many member states, in addition to Sierra Leone, have highlighted the importance of exchanging national experiences on gender perspectives. So I'm really glad that we're able to do that today. But they also recognize, as you mentioned, the need to collect sex and gender disaggregated data to document the differing impacts that small arms and light weapons are having on women, men, girls, and boys. I think it's important also to distinguish between looking at the impact on women, but also highlighting the importance of women's full, effective, and meaningful participation in activities related both to peace and security more broadly, but specifically those related to the Programme of Action. One further topic that was raised at BMS8 was one that your ambassador actually in New York, Victoria Soleimani from Sierra Leone, spoke at the recent Women, Peace and Security Focal Points Network meeting that we had in Geneva. And that was, as you mentioned, the importance of coordinating work on small arms national action plans with work on national action plans related to women, peace and security, as well as wider development policies. So I think we can really see that there's beginning to be interest generated both within the women, peace and security movement, but also within the small arms field, that we really need to ensure that the linkages between those NAPs are clear, that they're both referring to the same things, and that they're connected. So thank you very much for that intervention. And with that, I'd like to bring in our next speaker, Colonel Conte Binet from the Sierra Leone National Commission on Small Arms. And we've asked the Colonel to unpack these linkages between these different agendas a little more based on his experience. So Colonel, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Madam Finda Senesi, moderators, excellencies, and distinguished panelists. I'm honored and appreciate the opportunity granted by these side events to share the experience of Sierra Leone in the implementation of the United Nations Programme of Action, the African Union Roadmap on silencing the guns in Africa by 2030, the ECOWAS Convention, and of course, the National Action Plan. The first National Action Plan in Sierra Leone was developed in 2011 and expired in December 2016. In its implementation, a lot of lessons have been learned, and I believe going forward, we are better prepared to implement the next National Action Plan. We just concluded the review of the past National Action Plan in collaboration with the Mines Advisory Group and the Small Arms Survey, who are both in this forum. We are now looking forward to their support in the development of a more comprehensive new action plan that will capture our current situation and expanded mandate. National action plans initiate and build on activities that strengthen the security sector reform, the women, peace and security, and the transnational organized crime in providing security, inclusive collaboration, addressing root causes, implementing national policies and linkages that connect the dots between small arms response, security sector reform, women, peace and security, including the transnational organized crime. One of the lessons learned is that a national action plan should be comprehensive and integrate the roles of all key players in the peace and security sectors and social economic developments. The control of arms is geared to providing a conducive environment for development. Development should be inclusive and address the needs of all categories in the national population. We are therefore looking forward to developing a national action plan that is nationally honed beyond the Sierra Leone National Commission on Small Arms Office. The government agencies need to work in partnership with civil society organizations to utilize their grassroots mobilization networks and resource mobilization networks. We are stronger working together, women, men, girls, and boys, including youths, impacted differently by illicit arms and national action plans should articulate clear intervention that will address the needs of each stratum of the population. No one should be left behind. Gender, peace, and security relations to arms control have been well articulated by my sister, Finda Senesi. But let me reemphasize that we are seeking to develop a national action plan that will be gender sensitive and that will promote the participation of both men and women at all levels of small arms control and management. We will seek to ensure that intervention and formulate in line with designated gender and age sets data analysis. I believe partnering with women, peace and security platforms in the country will promote not only the United Nations Program of Action on Small Arms, but also the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. It will therefore require us to ensure that the new National Action Plan is anchored in the National Development Plan so that it is part of national priorities. We believe in that way, it will not only affect funding from the National Treasury, but also development partners. Indeed, responsibilities are shared among several ministries, including those of Defense, Internal Affairs and Information, as well as the Republic of Sierra Leone Armed Forces, the Sierra Leone Police, and international organizations. Therefore, a coordination mechanism tailored to the needs and working methods of the country's authority needs to be designed as part of any future national action plan. Collaboration will be key in the development and implementation of the next national action plan, as has been articulated in the National Action Plan Review Report. We believe the involvement of all stakeholders from the initiation to conclusion of the plan will yield understanding and ownership of identified priorities. We will seek to collaborate with regional initiatives such as the Organized Crime West African Response to Trafficking Projects, whose details will be shared later in this forum, the Mano River Union, MRU, and ECOWAS, because there is a lot to learn from each other, and cross-border collaborations is the way to go. Sierra Leone cannot be secured when her neighbors are not. I will therefore call for a regional support mechanism that will ensure as many countries as possible in the region have current national action plans that will offer a solid basis for collaborative cross-border initiative and sharing of experiences and lessons learned. In concluding, my intervention may underscore the following. National action plans should enjoy national ownership across the government and other stakeholders. It will serve as a reliable resource mobilization tool. It should promote gender sensitivity and awareness in peace and security intervention. Its implementation should be inclusive and inviting to civil society contributions and meaningful participation. And lastly, cross-border collaboration is key to securing national interventions. Looking forward, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the panel, looking forward to the outcome document of the biennial meeting of states 8 to set global priorities that we shall integrate in our national action plan. This is what we are waiting for. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kanobine, for sharing the experiences and the aspirations that you're having in the process of advancing your new national action plans. And I know that the lessons that you have shared will be useful to the rest of West Africa when they do review their national action plans, most of which for sure are either outdated or just about to get to a point where they need to be reviewed. Currently at the BMS, the member states are also calling for the development and implementation of national action plans, capacity building programs, and other national policies which address all stages and life cycle of the firearms to ensure that there is adequate control and management. And this will enable states to be able to set their national priorities right when they have national action plans. And we know that this also will offer room for them to be able to collaborate regionally. And we believe that with this initiative, if all countries have their national action plans ready, it will enhance the implementation of the ECOWAS Convention. And with all this said now, it is now my pleasure to invite our next speaker, who is Josephine Dresner. And she is the International Policy and Partnerships Director at Mine Advisory Group. And we are so delighted to have you with us. And now you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would just first of all like to take the opportunity to thank the government of Sierra Leone for our now really quite long-term collaboration. I believe it has not been quite a decade, but it has been close to a decade. Similarly, I would also like to thank Small Arms Survey for what I think is now approaching 2 decades of cooperation, which we're also delighted has become increasingly formalized and strategic over the past few years, particularly in the ECOWAS region. We thank ECOWAS and all the ECOWAS member states, and as I say already, particularly for the close cooperation in relation to Sierra Leone. I would also like to congratulate Sierra Leone for a successful ATT presidency last year, and even more so for the continued momentum and leadership that Sierra Leone is showing since CSP7. We should also take the opportunity to thank donors, including Germany, Sweden, Canada, and the EU via the Okwati project the Colonel has already mentioned. And I think with that, I will just talk briefly about what some of the cooperation in recent years around national action plans has looked like. I will come back to Sierra Leone in a moment, but of course, my distinguished colleagues on the panel have already set out very, very clearly the impressive progress that has been made in Sierra Leone and particularly in the integration of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. One of the other countries that we have done a significant amount of work on national action plans in partnership with Sierra Leone is Burkina Faso. And this began initially in 2017 with a priority matrix that focused on physical security and stockpile management. And this was a very useful tool, but we recognized Small Arms Survey and the Burkinabe authorities together at this point that there was a need for a more participatory process and something that was certainly broader than just PSSM. And this is why the decision was taken to broaden the process out to a full national action plan. Following an evaluation of the national action plan in 2020, it became evident that this wouldn't automatically be easy to apply with a change in leadership in the new commission, new staff, a new mandate. So new scoping and high-level outreach was needed, together with capacity assessment, which again was conducted by MAG and Small Arms Survey, of course, in close partnership with the national authorities. Now in 2022, we still are, of course, learning, and we recognise that there is now a need for a diagnostic workshop before moving into the more detailed design phase of a national action plan. In Sierra Leone, clearly the examples already provided by the panelists, I won't repeat those, but I will certainly say that the points that I'm going to come to next on lessons learned and on challenges are going to very much echo the points already made by other panelists. So I do apologise for any repetition, but at the same time, of course, it would be significantly more concerning if we were to be disagreeing. So again, apologies for repetition. In Sierra Leone, I think the lessons learned have been absolutely fantastic, and I think one of the key points, simple as it's going to sound, is that the lessons learned through the process that has just been described by the panelists from Sierra Leone, the lessons learned have really been properly digested and applied into the process going forward. And this is something, it sounds simple as I say, but it really is significant. At the same time, Sierra Leone is one of 15 member states in the ECOWAS region. And of course, there is a need for extensive support. Guinea-Bissau have never had a national action plan, and they have reached out recently requesting support in the development of a national action plan. This is a context in which the socio-political situation is extremely complex, and it's therefore extremely important that they not only have a plan for arms control, but also one that is integrated with other agendas. In addition, MAG and Small Arms Survey together, at least within the next 12 months, hope to be moving forward to work on another 2 to 3 national action plans in the ECOWAS region. I'm not going to name those states at this point because I don't believe that everything has been fully agreed, and you know, of course, I don't want to overreach in that respect. But it certainly is really important to recognise, and again, a point that has already been made, that this is very much a regional issue. This is the control of arms and addressing the impact of armed violence must be a shared endeavour between neighbouring states. And I think in this regard, the ECOWAS model and the fact that there is a legally binding convention that provides not only the legal framework, but also the structure that is needed, provides a critical entry point and a really important framework for pulling those states together to cooperate. And I certainly do believe that the ECOWAS region has many important lessons learned that actually can be applied in other regions as well. One of the questions that Small Arms Survey had asked me to talk about was entry points to discussing national action plans. And certainly it's a point that MAG has made many a time in many different forums, that arms control is a sensitive issue, of course, and certainly when working with external actors, not all national authorities are automatically going to be open to working with unfamiliar people straight away, and therefore confidence building is a really important first step. And this is really actually how MAG became involved in national action plans in the first place. I think many people will be aware that we, started off as initially a mine action agency and then a provider of physical security and stockpile management assistance, which has moved more broadly to weapons and ammunition management, working with partners to look at the full life cycle, and also a broader AVR lens. That physical security and stockpile management, the weapons and ammunition management work, is a really, really important entry point and confidence building measure. The ongoing presence on the ground MAG has means that we can build dialogue with national authorities. We're able to build that trust because, again, as has already been mentioned, national ownership is absolutely critical. The provision of support by actors like MAG, like Small Arms Survey, the WAM baseline assessments that are conducted by UNIDIR. These are tools for the support to national authorities. They are not something that should be done to states. They are something that is there as a means to provide support to states. I think in some countries, I don't believe this is quite so much the case in West Africa, but certainly it's an example that I've heard in a couple of other regions. Civil society organizations, and that's local civil society, actually can sometimes provide entry points for the development of national action plans. I'm very happy to be corrected if there are examples of that having taken place in the ECOWAS region. But certainly in the Philippines, for example, there are civil society organizations that have constitutional agreements that can provide entry points for planning around arms control and the reduction of armed violence. International cooperation and assistance, of course, is also an entry point. Donors should be doing a lot more than just providing the funding, though, of course, that is very important. They should also be engaged at country level and via embassies, because, again, that dialogue and that political cooperation is as important as the funding. There has been a lot of discussion this week at the BMS, as there usually is under the Programme of Action Framework, about synergies in particular with the Arms Trade Treaty. And I do think that this is also an important entry point, and certainly I know that the ATT has, of course, provided an important framework for Sierra Leone. And again, going back to the presidency, I think this is something that is really important to recognise. And of course, as already discussed, other agendas such as women, peace and security, security sector reform. And also, I think it's really important to note the significance of development cooperation. Often small arms and light weapons are not seen as part of development cooperation, but we need to avoid these silos. I've also already mentioned the importance of legal frameworks, and particularly the opportunities offered by the ECOWAS Convention, and in other regions, we also, of course, have the regional roadmaps, such as in the CARICOM region and as in the Western Balkans. So, of course, all of these are very important examples and entry points for the development of national action plans, and also for aligning national action plans between neighbouring states or states in the same region. In terms of lessons learned and some reflections, the National Action Plan development process should be as consultative as possible and not solely include formal security actors. Should also include civil society organisations that are well placed to understand the drivers of conflict and the supply and demand of arms amongst communities. And again, I think this is something that Sierra Leone has risen to this challenge, and the way that the new National Action Plan is being developed and will be implemented, I think is a really impressive example, and one that we should continue to be profiling with the broader community. The involvement of the Ministry of Planning is always going to be significant, and with specific reference to cross-cutting challenges and objectives, particularly related to youth and women. And decision makers and budget holders, there needs to be awareness raising with those stakeholders to ensure that weapons and ammunition control is not siloed, it's not perceived as competing with other national priorities, such as healthcare and education, but actually envisaged as being complementary and contributing to the achievement of objectives in those areas. In order to ensure that the National Action Plan is a living document, not something that is developed and put on the shelf, but something that is actually actively implemented. And we would strongly recommend that there is a monitoring and evaluation framework developed alongside the national action plans to ensure regular monitoring and facilitate reporting against national targets and international obligations. And the development process and methodology should actually be documented for ease of replication and updating by national authorities. And this is, of course, useful both for updating of the National Action Plan in the same country, but in that country, but also for sharing lessons learned either within the region or more broadly across regions. I think in terms of why national action plans are important and how they're important, they're really to do with coordination and ensuring inclusive and sustainable processes. And I think this is a theme that runs throughout, throughout arms control and throughout wider arms violence reduction. Challenges certainly the availability of authorities and individuals in some countries, particularly during and after major political changes or disruption due to insecurity. You see impacts politically and in terms of availability. So this is a very practical challenge, and one that certainly, again, can be well addressed by better alignment of different agendas, because you are obviously using your capacity and your resources more effectively if you're aligning those different agendas more closely. Inevitably, there are rotation of staff within and personnel within national commissions, which means that we need clearer understanding of capacities and mandates. And for that, again, the documentation of the process is really important. We must recognise that one size does not fit all, even within regions, within sub-regions. Every country has its own challenges, and therefore, whilst we must share lessons learned, we also must always be driven first and foremost by the context and by what things look like on the ground. Therefore, the engagement of civil society, again, is critical. I think in Sierra Leone, the emphasis on civilian weapons is really, really significant. And again, an example for other states and for other regions. I think it is one thing to focus on national stockpiles, and that is really, really important, but to also look at the civilian weapons is absolutely critical. I think to reach the last few points, conscious of time, ideally, we should look for alignment between national action plans in regions and sub-regions, recognising the point that already made about things needing to be context specific. At the same time, the more synergies, the more harmonisation there is, the more inter-country and cross-border cooperation is able to achieve. And I think that this is certainly an area where we are able to do more. Overall, national action plans are underfunded and in some ways undervalued at the political level. This is certainly not the case for Sierra Leone, but I'm not sure that even whether they do exist, I'm not sure that every state is necessarily making the most of their national action plans once they are developed. And there is a responsibility of all stakeholders involved to make sure that once the national action plan is developed, it continues to be useful, it continues to be used. And that really also comes back to the development process and the involvement of all the right stakeholders at the beginning. Finally, with the role of national commissions expanding in some countries, particularly in the West Africa region, to address issues around, for example, IEDs, improvised landmines, which also links to the diversion of ammunition. We need to think about the interactions between small arms and light weapons, ammunition, humanitarian mine action, trade, and industry in a wider way. And having these issues developed in silos is not likely to get coherent results. So in those countries where they're facing those issues, we need to think about how the capacities that are available can best manage those issues and ensure that national commissions, whilst centralising national ownership, are also receiving the best possible support from the international community to ensure that they are able to manage those challenges. I would like to thank you very much for listening to these reflections, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Joe. That was a really rich intervention that I think touched upon a lot of the topics that are really being discussed currently at BMS8. One thing that's definitely been flagged is the importance of national action plans to define national priorities and targets and to coordinate the implementation of strategies, stakeholder involvement and resource allocation. I think very simply, it's very difficult to organize collaborations between different actors within a given state and also between bordering states, as you mentioned, if things are not clearly outlined in a national action plan. So I think simply having a national action plan in the first place is definitely a good practice we've seen in the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and it's something I think we could see more of in the area of small arms and light weapons, and definitely Sierra Leone is a good example of that. Obviously, the topic of BMS8 is international cooperation, and there has been a lot of discussion about the need for both South-South and triangular cooperation with relation to regional and sub-regional action plans, noting that many of the challenges are cross-border in nature. It's also interesting that at BMS8, we're not just talking about the need for donor support. There's been discussions about a fellowship program where there would be knowledge transfer, as well as tech transfer, looking at perhaps new ways that we can mark and trace weapons. So I think this is a hot topic, and I'm really glad that you raised that. And there have also been currently very small references to the need to coordinate with industry and the private sector, but I think that's definitely something we'll see being elaborated further as we move forward. So just one thing before we move on, I will mention that after the speakers have all presented their interventions, there'll be a chance for some question and answer. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, please do make use of the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll put your questions to the panelists. But then we're now going to move on. Of course, when we talk about cross-border coordination in small arms control, that's something that's very important. But when it comes to transnational organized crime, that's basically the bread and butter of that particular field. So that brings me to the next speaker, Olivia Davis, who is a project coordinator for the Organized Crime West Africa Response to Trafficking project at UNDP in Sierra Leone. And she's going to tell us a bit more about the impact of the illicit trade on small arms on transnational organized crime in Sierra Leone, as well as West Africa more broadly, and how arms control efforts and national action plans in particular can contribute to combating it. So without further ado, Olivia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And distinguished members of the panel and audience, I would like to thank the Small Arms Survey for the opportunity to speak at this BMS8 side event on the UN Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons. Transnational organized crime, I would like to establish a working definition for which my presentation will be centered on. Is organized crime coordinated across national borders, involving groups or markets of individuals working in more than one country to plan and execute illegal business ventures. West Africa has become a major transit point, as we all know, for illegal drug shipments to Europe and even the United States. That's according to the White House archive. It has also become a source of and transit point for methamphetamine destined for the Far East, according to the White House archives as well. West Africa also serves as a transit route for illicit proceeds flowing back to other countries across the continent. Whereas the operations of transnational organized crime in Sierra Leone is somehow concealed, effects of their presence and operations in the country is quite visible. There are signs of weapon trafficking across borders, the borderland communities in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. There are signs of increased armed robbery, human trafficking across borders, increased human smuggling to various countries for illicit activities. There are signs of trafficking in persons, there are signs of trafficking in drugs, and making those drugs affect our youths, especially within the age gap between 18 to 35. So we have currently drugs that are being made locally here that affect a large proportion of the youth population in Sierra Leone. And we also have minimal cases of kidnapping and the trade of human parts, and the penetration of state institutions to high-level corruption, which affects good governance. In Sierra Leone, transnational organized crime is operating in 2 levels. The organized crime that are concealed, the organized crime groups that are concealed, and the individual level groups who carry out these similar illegal activities. They are not a form of, they are not operating in the form of organized, transnational organized crime, but they are just individuals. And these are the ones that are mostly caught. But the organized crime, like the transnational, the core transnational organized crime group operating in this region, in Sierra Leone and the Mano River Union, is not named. There is no name, there is no identity, but like I just mentioned, the influence or the activities that I just demonstrate, like the kidnappings and all, show sign of their existence in the country. The illegal trade in small arms have increased organized armed robbery. So Sierra Leone is basically, in terms of transnational organized crime, being affected by a high level or high rate of armed robbery. So, but this is being influenced or supported largely by the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, entrenched corruption amongst key state institutions, especially around the western rural area district in Sierra Leone. Between January to March this year, 2022, 5 unlawful possession of firearms were recorded in the southern region of Bo, which includes Bo, Moyamba, Bonth, and Pujeon district. And these 5 illegal possession of firearms resulted into 4 reported cases of armed robbery in the south and 1 death just for this year alone. This is even more in the northern region of Sierra Leone. Now going back to the Sahel, Nigeria and Cameroon, illicit trade in small arms have increased transnational organized crime activities such as increased armed robbery, kidnapping, drug trafficking, human smuggling, human trafficking, ritual killings, violence extremisms, terrorism, pastoral conflicts, sporadic killings by unknown gunmen, religious segmented violence, and sporadic attacks on transport routes and communities. That is for the Sahel and Nigeria specifically. Recently, at least 2,968 people were killed, while 148 were abducted in areas in Niger, Zamfara, and Kaduna from January to March 2022, according to data released by the Nigerian Security Tracker in the country. Based on percentage from the Premium Times, the northern part of the country, that is in Nigeria, recorded 2,575, which amounts to 86.8%, while the southern part of the country recorded 398 deaths, averaging 13.2%. Substantial capacities for the local manufacturing of arms exist in Senegal, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Nigeria. And we have seen similar trends of transnational organized crime activities and its associated impacts in these countries. The illicit trade in arms have strengthened transnational organized crime networks on piracy and armed robbery, and armed robbery against ships, which is on the increase in the Gulf of Guinea, as well as in other parts of West Africa. The illicit trade in arms have created linkages between public officials and organized crime, organized criminal activities, such as money laundering, fraud, and drug trafficking in these countries, thus affecting peace, stability, good governance, and the efficiency of the Sustainable Development Goals. To conclude, arms control efforts, inclusive of the national action plans, if fully supported and implemented, have detailed activities and actions for all different stakeholders to play a collaborative role in responding to transnational organized crime. The national action plans have activities for member states that strengthen security apparatus, that strengthen enforcement and judicial agencies with regional and international frameworks, such as the AU Silence on the Guns and the ECOWAS Conventions, the UN Programme of Action, and others. Small arms programs and national action plans have started and could further establish economic and political structures that facilitate employment, good governance, and political stability, so that incentives and opportunities for organized crime can be drastically reduced. And we have seen this in the border, operating in the border communities between Sierra Leone and Guinea and Liberia through the ECOWAS EU-funded Okwati project, whereby we initiated what is called the Weapons for Development initiatives. So we have seen some level of economic improvements in the lives of people, to deter them from the use of small guns and the use of the manufacturing of locally made guns across the border communities. The national action plans can initiate reform of the security sector in order to adequately respond to new security threats on organized crime. The national action plans and small arms programs can build the much needed partnerships and civil society organizations and informal community structures towards combating organized crime and terrorism. And such needed partnership is key, and it can only be strengthened and further improved through the national action plan. And last but not the least, the national action plans can also attempt to address root causes, which are the leading contributing factor to a weak state, which organized crime and terrorism and transnational organized crime groups normally penetrate and find as safe haven and breeding ground, to foster their operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver Davis, for giving us insights on the issues of transnational organized crime within the region, and specifically what is happening in Sierra Leone. We really appreciate. And just to state that the matters you have raised also have been framed within the draft outcome document of BMS8. It's part of what countries are discussing, with the recognition of the importance to prevent and combating the illicit trade in small arms, so that their contribution to human trafficking, organized crime, smuggling, and all those things can be eradicated. So we really appreciate your contributions, and we look forward to interacting more during the part for questions. It's now then my pleasure to be able to invite our next speaker, so that he can be able to speak to us. And the issue that we're going out to be looking at is the issue of security sector reform and governance. And our speaker is Alexander Buria, and he is a senior security sector reform advisor at DCAV's, the Sub-Saharan Africa Division. And he's going to be talking to us about how to integrate SSR in terms of looking at a good governance of the security sector and its reform, and how this can be integrated to bring a wholesome security improvement for government and in the region. You're most welcome, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Francis. Good afternoon and good evening, dear colleagues. Thank you very much to the Small Arms Survey and the government of Sierra Leone for including DCAF, the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, in this very interesting panel. As many of you may know, DCAF has been working on security sector reform and governance issues for over 20 years in roughly 80 countries around the world. So my aim is to maybe touch on some of the key observations and lessons we have from a range of our programs and try to highlight how some of our lessons and approaches are relevant also to small arms and light weapons and arms control agendas. I think just to start off, maybe just to provide a little bit of background, I think as rightfully pointed out by several speakers, security sector governance and reform has for a long time played a key supporting function, or has been a complementary process to reinforce arms control measures. But I do second the idea that we too often work in silos, and we haven't necessarily explored enough the possible interlinkages and complementarities that exist between SSR and small and light weapons agendas. So I think if I can in this presentation, maybe highlight how we can maybe work a little bit more systematically together. I think in general, we can often see a correlation between the effectiveness of regulating and managing small and light weapons or dealing with proliferation of these and the extent to which there's really an effective system of oversight, management, and governance in the broader security sector. I think we would fail to find a single example where we've been effective in one agenda without or ineffective in one agenda and effective in the other. So the success of one often influences the other. I think it's clear that an unaccountable or ineffective security sector itself often fuels proliferation of small arms. We have seen this in many countries. In the Horn of Africa, this is in particular the case in South Sudan, in Somalia as well. Often, if we see that ineffective security sector, unaccountable security sector, we'll often see, a drive for small arms. The security sector is also key to those prevention efforts, but if we don't build the capacity and enabling systems for the security sector to do its prevention work, then obviously it's difficult to tackle small and light weapons prevention. I think the linkages between the two agendas are extensive, but let me maybe highlight just a few. I think in SSR, we often focus on the importance of the holistic approach. And if we learned at least one thing from the shortcomings of SSR processes, it's capacity building and policies on their own are insufficient. We need to look at the broader issues of governance, inclusiveness, corruption, management, and command and oversight. It's this menu of different approaches. When it comes together, that's when we have success in dealing with any security challenges, including arms control. So just maybe to be a little bit more specific, if we look at examples from whether it's Liberia or Gambia in West Africa, areas where DCAF has worked a lot in the last 10 to 15 years, the Gambia being one of our largest programs currently in West Africa. But one of the things that we see is key to dealing with any security issue is a three-tier approach, meaning don't overly focus on a top-down state-centric model to reform, but rather try to work at three different levels. And let me start off with where I see actually some of the most important work being done in this area. If we have local security governance structures that enable the communities to come together with the security actors to both think through what the threats are at the community level, but also to create joint action, this is actually key to dealing with many of the problems that have been raised by other speakers. A good decentralized form of local security sector governance, I think, has proven in the Mono River Union as being one of the best ways of collecting intelligence, mobilizing the community towards addressing issues, including arms trade or illegal arms trade and trafficking of light weapons. If we are extremely practical, we can even look at local community policing action plans, which are now prevalent in virtually all countries in West Africa. If those include provisions or analysis of threats related to small arms, and then include specific actions within those that could be addressed through policing actions, but also through community actions, that's a good way of mobilizing the local community to deal with this issue. At the national level, I think here we need to be looking at broadly the wider security sector. We need to be looking at the role of ministries, parliaments, human rights commissions, national security councils, and having a collective action across that sector. We've seen time and time again where a lack of capacity or lack of systems in any of those institutions actually undermines the collective efforts in dealing with any security threat. I think reforms and further strengthening national security councils has been one of the priorities in many West African countries, and actually focusing on this body as a coordination body, as a body that sets policies, but also oversees progress in dealing with national security threats like small and light weapons. Actually, that has provided significant dividends in terms of tackling national security issues. Investments in national security councils can be as simple as reinforcing their legal mandate, but down to actually helping them provide building tools for threat assessments, to have coordination meetings, so building structures within the National Security Council to actually bring the different security agencies together. One of the forgotten areas that I think today we haven't spoken enough of, but we need to still look at the critical role of ministries, whether it's the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Interior or Home Affairs, and look at how we could actually further empower the ministries to play both an effective management role in terms of policies, but also oversight. And here, one of the actors I think that is also critical in terms of oversight are parliaments. I think on here, any efforts to building the capacity of parliaments in terms of overseeing this agenda, but also in its lawmaking and representative functions, I think, again, that can be an extremely important element in terms of national action towards dealing with any security issue. In terms of practical steps, here we need to be looking at what type of monitoring systems are available to Parliament, what type of information is available to Parliament, but also the wider mandate of Parliament on any issue. So we've seen in countries like Ethiopia, currently the parliament is now looking at the issue of small and light weapons, but they don't necessarily have the capacity to deal with it. And unfortunately, they don't necessarily find partners that are actually willing or able to provide that reinforcement of capacity relatively quickly. I won't touch too much on the regional aspect, but I think a lot of speakers have rightly pointed out that any issue, security issue, requires increasingly a regional approach, not only a national level approach. But here, I think, especially in West Africa, more needs to be done in terms of creating better structures for intelligence sharing, integrated border management concepts, and even joint approaches in terms of monitoring threats and security risks. There's simply not enough information sharing, or it's relatively ad hoc, but more needs to be done on building those systems for information sharing between states. I won't touch on this too much, but I think in terms of the wider sector, we do need to still encourage a more comprehensive and broader approach to dealing with arms control that looks at the role of private security providers, regulating their role, overseeing their role, but also engaging them as one of the key actors on virtually any security issues, but definitely when it comes to small and light weapons. Local and traditional leaders are often sort of the forgotten element of our approaches to, again, any security sector reform processes, but we often find that these are some of the most influential actors in a country, and too often we forget about their critical role. And there's a lot we can do to empower them, to work with them, to sensitize them on these issues, to make them reinforce our collective agendas. The other element that I think DCAF we've been working more and more with is working with also media on their oversight function, their reporting function, but also their advocacy function. If we unlock sort of the strong or the power of the media, it can be extremely important in generating that political will, but also sensitizing the general public on this issue, and eventually ensuring accountability for effective action on this. The last point, and I think it's been touched on several times, but in security sector governance and reform, increasingly we're tackling the issue of spending in the wider sector. So in DCAF, but also the UN and other agencies, more and more we're doing security sector expenditure reviews in West Africa. There's recent examples of these in Guinea-Bissau or Gambia or Liberia. But too often these show that whatever issue we're trying to tackle in the security sector, we're not necessarily thinking through whether or not what we're proposing is affordable, financially realistic, and eventually financially sustainable. So one of the things that I think whenever we hear about action plans or building institutions, I think we need to start with also a clear understanding of the cost implications and the broader expenditure across the security sector. Obviously, if you increase in one area, it'll have a knock-on effect in others. One sort of example recently from Gambia is the Small Arms Commission. They have great ambition. They would like to implement their mandate, but for many years now, they've been struggling with generating the sufficient financial resources. And one of the things that I think the lesson from this is they haven't necessarily been part of the broader security sector financial planning. So they've been let off as a sort of a distinct area, not necessarily a part of the security sector. So when there are high-level policy discussions on spending priorities in the sector, they've been sort of marginalized in that. So we need to do a better job of applying a broader and more comprehensive approach to looking at expenditure in the sector. So with those closing words, I think I would just like to say one of the opportunities I think going forward is also to reflect on the extent to which we can mobilize SSR policies and strategies, whether it's a police reform strategy, SSR strategy, or a national security strategy, to which are things that we often find in national frameworks, but how we can mobilize these to also better reinforce and integrate the small and light weapons and arms control agendas as well, to reflect those as policy priorities. This could be things like strengthening police investigation capacities on this issue to more high-level strategic, budgetary considerations. But we need to do a better job of actually integrating this agenda into the broader SSR processes. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very thorough intervention there, Alex. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the importance of costing. I think one thing that you've mentioned there is looking at whether some of the provisions we're considering are financially feasible. But another topic that's also come up at BMS8 is the fact that we sometimes have problems of excessive accumulation when it comes to the national stockpile. So sometimes states are very ready to spend money on weapons, but not so ready to spend money on things like physical security and stockpile management. And as a consequence, then they end up selling the weapons, and these can then ultimately end up on illicit markets if we're not able to track and trace them. So that's a really important point that you added there. And I think you've really highlighted the importance of linking this with security sector reform. I think the word SSR hasn't been used that much in the BMS8 discussions, but they have made quite a lot of references to the Security Development Goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, to which I think security sector reform is inevitably a critical part. So they've also mentioned a lot of elements of security sector reform efforts, such as you're looking at national normative frameworks, reviewing doctrine, procedures and capabilities, working on organizational development and ensuring adequate training, equipment, personnel, finance, infrastructure, and security management. So I think SSR, is very good at capturing all of those, but also putting it within that security sector governance framework that you mentioned, with accountability, transparency, effectiveness, and efficiency. And of course, we need to look at the human side, the management side as well. So I'm glad that you mentioned the role of ministries. If some of our participants today are interested, I know also that the Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons will explore this a little bit further, the role of parliamentarians and ministries at an event tomorrow, looking at parliamentary engagement on the programme of action, also linking with the 2030 and Women, Peace and Security agendas. So that brings us to the end of our speakers' interventions, and we're now going to proceed to the Q&A. So I think we just have time for a couple of questions. So I hope all of our panelists have managed to see the questions. I've just dropped them into the chat. So the first question we would like to put to you is the fact that we can see the multiplication of actors involved in small arms control is a good practice, but obviously it comes with challenges for coordination. especially when we're involving both government and civil society. So I wondered whether you might have any suggestions for other countries based on your experience as to how we overcome this challenge of working with a multiplicity of actors. And the second question is to look a bit more at how we can practically encourage national commissions to realistically integrate transnational organized crime, security sector reform, women, peace and security, and other initiatives. So I don't know if we've got any volunteers to start off on that question. We did have Finda Senesi speak at the beginning, but I'm not sure if she would like to come in here.
I am here.
Would you have
so
any responses to these questions, Finda?
Yes, of course, because it is very much important, because the government on its own could not achieve whatever its priorities, its agenda, without the involvement of those actors. We call them civil society and others. Of course, in the light of what this question is referring to, how will governments be able to overcome the challenge now that you have many actors, other state actors are there? So for me, the first thing is the government to constructively engage before taking any action in terms of planning, particularly with respect to small arms control or to proliferation of small arms. They cannot do it together. So first of all, there should be an agenda on how to engage the society, because they have to know what is going on. And before any coordination could happen, they should be engaged in fact, the planning stages, and there should be an awareness for them to know what they are going into and what the role they are expected to play, and the role there should be, although we have distinct roles, but there should be a coordination mechanism of how together the government and the civil society we achieve the priorities. So the involvement of civil society is very key, is a prerequisite to achieve any national action plans. And also, we have to say this because there should be open-mindedness on the part of both. There shouldn't be any ulterior motive. And of course, everything government wants to do, bring it forth, discuss in a very constructive manner, in a very transparent manner, and then you have to involve them from day one up to the achievement of the priorities. So if they see themselves as part of the plan and they are involved in the implementation until the end, you will see them naturally giving up themselves and supporting the action. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Finda. And I think that links a little bit back to one of the points I think Joe was making about confidence building. So I think we have about 1 or 2 minutes per speaker. So the next person would be Colonel Binet. I don't know if you have any reactions to the 2 questions we've put in the chat there. Colonel, if you'd like, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to speak on how we can practically integrate organized group that are always thinking on violence. I would say that the solution to this kind of answer could be that we try to have, we engage these organized group that are militant, that are engaged in such issues that will help to make the society not to be what we want it to be. So we have to engage them, either through government, the government of Sierra Leone coming in to sensitize the populace so that they can always know what is happening around. Or we, like what we are doing in the commission, we go out to the border areas, especially to the regional headquarters, like we did a few weeks ago. We speak to key stakeholders of the security sector in order to explain to them that they should be members of the helping the security sector to identify such things like weapons being trafficked into our areas or going out of the country. So we have to sensitize the populace, especially where we know these areas are hotspots. There are areas that could bring things that will not be good for the country. So we have been engaging. Our only problem is the funding to activate or codify our activities into these areas that we know. That is the concern, I would say. We have to engage people so that people will understand that they should come out from violence. We will continue to monitor the weapons that, especially shotguns, that people can use against themselves in these border areas.
Thank you, Curl. I think you've highlighted a really important point that Alex was also mentioning that links the national and the local, right? So we see it's a really good practice in Sierra Leone that you try and engage people at all different levels, especially in the border areas. We know it's the case in some other countries that national small arms commissions tend to stay in their capitals rather and are surrounded by members of the security sector. So I think it's a really important point about the need to be proactive and perhaps also to provide capacity building to help other people to engage in these processes. So next on our list then was Joe. Do you have anything to say in response to these two questions?
Yes, I will keep it very brief because I would not want to try and kind of propose to speak on behalf of how things should happen at the national level, but I will speak on behalf of how I think the international community should work. And that is really to say, you know, in these, the National Commission has the mandate and the role and the responsibility for coordination, and the international community needs to work in a way that empowers and supports that role in coordination rather than bypassing or undermining. And recognizing, I mean, Sierra Leone has a very strong National Commission. Not every National Commission has the same strength. Nevertheless, we need to respect and again support and empower that mandate. Therefore, from my perspective, from MAG's perspective, it's very important that every international actor recognizes the absolutely critical importance of coordination, and that before embarking on any initiative, whether you are an international organization, an NGO, a UN agency, a donor, that fundamentally you are thinking, what other initiatives are there, who else should be involved, and how should it be complementary, rather than, you know, what can my one organization do and how might it benefit my organizational strategy. And I think this is the responsibility of every actor involved. That's it.
Thanks for that, Joe. No, I think that's really important to remind donors that they also have a responsibility in this as well. And I think it's a shame that often they'll spend monies on, you know, duplicate activities when, you know, the Colonel has mentioned some very specific financial needs he has in terms of engaging the local community. So thanks for that contribution. Olivia, I know that the field that you work in involves a lot of coordination across borders and across many different sectors. So do you have any words of wisdom based on these two questions?
Yes, definitely. So with regards to the challenging coordination between governments and CSOs, in my experience, I would like to just give a few strategies to strengthen short coordination. One, also that speaks to what Josephine has just said, because that will also imply on how the donors contribute in structuring coordination, because they also have a role to play largely in how the activities and the programs they are supporting should be implemented at the national level. So one of the strategies is to identify CSO-led initiatives. And when these are identified, the CSO should take the lead in implementing those. And that being said, there will be a thin line of disagreement. There will be a thin line of the odds to happen, because the commissions are government-based and set up commissions, and the CSOs are more or less a freelance. So there are activities that best suit CSOs, and there are activities that best suits government. But at the same time, there should be a point of convergence where collaboration and one voice and togetherness is needed. So we need to understand these lines. And if we try to operate along these lines and we draw them where necessary, we converge them where necessary, we separate them where necessary with the help of our donors, I believe coordination will not be challenging. And then the other is to delegate cross-border activities specifically to CSOs at the grassroots level. And the other is to organize monthly coordination meetings between governments, NATCOMs, governments, and CSOs. So we even recently, the NATCOM of Sierra Leone recently conducted one kind of ministers and MPs conference between the NATCOM and the government, state ministers and MPs. And it was very useful because they were not afraid with some of the coordination aspects, some of the challenges faced by the NATCOM. And we saw how short coordination meetings were very helpful in getting the ministers to support some of the cause and some of the challenges faced by the Sierra Leone National Commission on Small Arms. On the second question, which has to do with how the NATCOM can realistically integrate transnational organized crime and security sector reform in their initiative. I think identify 2 points in my experience that I know can help to navigate that. Is small arms programs small arms programs to be integrated in transnational. Small arms programs should be integrated into transnational organized crime in key output areas. So when we have, for instance, a project like the Okwati and other small arms response programs, those projects should have specific output areas on transnational organized crimes. That way, you are also somehow, from the donor point of view or from the international point of view, giving a direct responsibility to the Commission to be acting on some of the initiatives. For instance, the Commission of Small Arms in Sierra Leone is working closely with the Transnational Organized Crime Unit. But my experience for the last 3 years, the work between the Transnational Organized Crime Unit and the NATCOM is not very close, it's not strengthened, and it's not fully integrated. There is not much connectedness between the two. So the best is to have transnational organized crime specific outputs in some of the small arms programs like the Okwati, even small arms survey initiatives and others, to be integrated into some of the key output areas for which the NATCOM will help coordinate and implement. And the other area is to review the mandated acts in Parliament that establish the Commission, because the current act in Sierra Leone does not go into, for the Small Arms Commission, does not go into transnational organized crime, except if it has to do with the specific issue of small arms. So that mandate has to be revised in Parliament when the mandate will be brought in. So far, because the Commission is on its verge of getting support from Parliament, so that it can be, its mandate can broaden beyond small arms control to arms control in general, just as the ATT framework. So yeah, so those are the 2 areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. And I like how you've kind of got some really concrete examples there of how we can create cross-references between these different programs of work, but also collaborative activities that kind of overcome perhaps this, it's a Venn diagram, these two, there are actors who work on 2 different fields, but then they can come together and work together on a common topic, and that perhaps can break down some of the stereotypes and judgments that these two groups have. So thanks for that. Finally then, Alex, do you have any reflections on the two questions we've got there?
Thanks. So I'll try to, I think the speakers were already comprehensive, but maybe just to give a slightly different view on the issue. So I think actually sometimes what works best in terms of improving coordination in a resource-constrained environment is to actually map existing initiatives by various institutions, whether it's the police, Ministry of Defense, or other actors, and then map how that actually can relate to the agenda you're pursuing, and in this case, small and light weapons. We often in DCAF work on police reform and work very closely with police. And I think actually you're reflecting on the 6 programs we have in the police strategies in the countries we work in. They don't necessarily touch very often specifically on small and light weapons. They probably see this as a slightly different agenda that's the responsibility of others and not necessarily the responsibility of police. But just very quickly, you could say, well, the investigation function of the police or the crime prevention of the police, that definitely has a key role in contributing, if not one of the leading roles on this agenda. And what could be is just, rather than creating a parallel or completely different set of priorities, is to actually take the policing priorities, reform strategies, and say, actually, how can these be sort of adapted or at least tweaked a little bit to also be more specific and targeted towards small and light weapons. In Ethiopia, where actually we developed a forensics development strategy. So we worked across the security sector on a range of issues, but we did speak to the small and light weapons community to actually find out all about the ballistics challenges, the different weapons challenges. So it's not that we were pursuing this as a specific topic, but we were mainstreaming all the different topics through one strategy that addressed kind of the forensic development needs of the police. But I think mainstreaming as much as possible is a good way of tackling that resource problem. The other is what I think is a key challenge for all of us working on security issues is strategic communications. Often we're not necessarily sufficiently outreaching to all the different stakeholders to tell them, these are our objectives, these are our aims, this is how you can engage. So spending a little bit of money on strategic communications, whether it's actually supporting strategic communications or building the capacity on strategic communications, can go a long way. So it's a cost-efficient way of actually reaching the stakeholders you need to reach and telling them, look, this is how your work can be relevant to this agenda. And the very last part is, there are certain actors that have that outreach and coordination role. So a National Security Council definitely has that within the national institutions, but also Parliament, usually through its representative function, can also be a key enabler of actually that outreach to all these different stakeholders, whether it's through the inquiry process or the consultations that they have. They can actually bring together a lot of the stakeholders, challenge what they're doing, and maybe motivate them to also be a partner in this. And the very last part, it goes back to the budget. So putting everything together on paper, seeing what budget is being spent on what, and mapping that comprehensively could actually say, okay, these stakeholders have the support, these don't. This is the areas that are underfunded, these are overfunded. That can also be a good, a tool to improve coordination as well. But it's obviously not an easy task for coordination in any setting. But so those are my suggestions.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think very relevant suggestions there as well. And I really like the point about, perhaps not reinventing the wheel, but looking at what's already being done and finding how that links with the same common objectives of what might be a new agenda when it comes to small arms and light weapons. So there are some other questions, but unfortunately that's all the time we have, because I know a couple of us have got to run back into the sessions of BMS8 and take what we've learned from this webinar into the discussion there. But I think if we just had to make some final conclusions, I think we would highlight that it definitely seems to be a good practice to have clear national action plans on small arms and light weapons, and to try our best to link those to policies and action plans in other fields in the area of women, peace and security, transnational organized crime and security sector reform, and also try and find linkages between NAPs in one country and in neighboring countries, and also in regional programs. So that was one thing that I took from there. The second thing being national ownership. So ensuring that donors are not, pushing national actors out of the way to impose their own agendas, but rather looking at what their actual needs are, both at the local and national level, and engaging with civil society organizations and the security sector to see what some of the initiatives that they're already doing could contribute to the same objectives of work on small arms and light weapons. And finally, I think it's important that we recognize then that human side. So there's an element of ensuring good communication, outreach, also trust building, confidence building through shared activities, and as Alex mentioned at the end, holding people accountable through structures related to both civil society and Parliament. So it's been a very, very rich discussion, and I couldn't really give it justice in that summary, but I know that we'll be processing these different thoughts as we go back into the BMS8 sessions, and we also look at how to implement the outcome document. And with that, then I'll just hand over to Francis to close the session.
Thank you very much, Kalum. I'll take this opportunity to appreciate the rich discussions that we've received from our panelists and the good thoughts. And therefore, first and foremost, want to share our vote of thanks to the government of Sierra Leone for hosting this occasion in partnership with the Small Arms Survey. And also now appreciate our panelist, Kano Bine, for coming in and sharing about Sierra Leone experience. We also want to appreciate Josephine for representing MAG, our very good partners in the region, and the good work that we'll be able to do there. And then also appreciate Olivia Davis for coming in to share about the organized crime and the project for Kwati and what is happening. We really are so grateful. And Alexander for coming in to share the experiences on SSR and connecting very well with the small arms management and control. Therefore, to all of you who participated in this, I want to say thank you very much and say that the message we are taking from this sitting is clear, that we need to approach the management of small arms from the broadened perspective, where we will look at other connecting issues like SSR, PSSM, conclude things like counterterrorism, include issues of organized crime, and all of them. And that way, for us to be effective, then we need to synergize. And as we synergize, we need to share information, creating space for one another, recognizing the mandate for various institutions, and this way then we have good effect on our intervention. With all that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to wish everyone a very nice afternoon. For those who are going back to the BMS session, all the best. We are looking forward to a very good document coming out of this to give us direction and roadmap for the next 2 years. So please ensure that the good decisions come across. And for all the others, please enjoy your evening for those who are in this side of the world. And thank you and bye-bye.